Okay, so we've been talking about the things leading up to the Cold War, including factors during World War II, like the differences between the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, we know they were allies during the war, but there's going to be some things that lead them to be not so friendly once the war is through. Okay, so what I want you to do is just follow along with your guided notes, just like we would in class. And then you'll bring those notes, those guided notes in tomorrow, and we'll do a more fun, engaging activity instead of doing notes. Okay? So let's follow along. And you can pause me at any time if I am going too fast. And write down any questions as they come along. Pause me, jot them down. Okay? All right. So when we compare the deaths that happened during World War II by the different countries, we know that the Soviet Union had a huge number of losses compared to other countries. Now that's not to say other countries, obviously, like China, had quite a few losses themselves, but relatively speaking, as far as military deaths, they had the greatest proportion on their side of their allies. Okay, and that's one of the things that led up to the Russian Revolution, one of the reasons they overthrew the Tsar, and really upset the Russian people, and so they supported Lenin when he came to power. Okay, so everything in bold is what I want you to write down on your note sheet. Okay, so just to summarize what I said, the death toll in Europe was very high after World War II. That's in general. Europe is a continent, remember, not a country. And just comparatively speaking, the U.S. lost relatively few people fighting. The war started in 1914, and the U.S. didn't join until after 1917. Okay. So when we talk about the world leaders during World War II, especially the victorious ones, okay, here we see Joseph Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union during World War II, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, obviously of the United States, and then we have Great Britain. And so they were all friends during the war, right? They had a common enemy. They were all trying to fight Germany. And then after the war was over and they had defeated Germany, they really lost this sense of friendship, right? Think about it. If you are not really friends with somebody, but you have a person that you both hate, right? You have something to talk about. Let's say that person that you hate transferred to a different school, then you have nobody in common to hate, right? Okay. So near the war's ending at the Yalta Conference, just before the war's end, the big three met at Yalta, right? Just the people that I just said, Stalin, Franklin Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill of Great Britain. And they decided that after Germany was defeated, the victorious Allies would divide Germany and the capital, Berlin, among themselves. And we'll look at a map in class, but Germany, being the whole country, is split down the middle, as well as Berlin, which we're going to actually look at in just a second. Berlin is also split down the middle. So this made sure that Germany did not rise up for a third time, because remember, they were the ones that were aggressive during World War I. Okay, and they were also aggressive during World War II. And so the big three knew that making Germany pay all those reparations again wasn't the answer, and that they needed a different solution. And so their solution this time around was to split up Germany to keep it divided and weak until they felt like it could be a trustworthy ally. So here we see, in this map here, we see all of Germany. Everything in green, red, blue, and orange. That's the entire country of Germany, okay? And so it's important to remember that Great Britain, France, and the United States are really good friends, and so they're going to end up combining their part of West Germany, okay? And the red part, controlled by the Soviet Union, doesn't really get along with these three, and so they're going to keep East Germany to themselves, okay? If you look at this little white space here, that's the city of Berlin, what we consider Berlin. And in this map next door, right over here, okay, that's an enlarged map of Berlin. And you can see it almost exactly mirrors this other split in the whole country. So you see blue, green, and yellow representing France, Great Britain, and the United States. And again, these three are very close friends. They're going to combine West Berlin, okay, to make it its own separate part of Berlin. Over here in the red, we know that red, from looking at propaganda of communism, red represents communism, so we associate that with the Soviet Union, and we can see the flag here. And so the city of Berlin is split up just like the country of Berlin, or the country of Germany, sorry. The weird thing is, notice where Berlin is. It's buried within the Soviet section of Germany. Okay, and that's going to cause problems that we're going to look at hopefully right now. Okay, so what I want you to do on your notes is, as we go along, I want you to type in what I'm typing in, if it will let me. Nope, it won't. We'll do that in class. So the first thing that's going to happen after the war's end is the Marshall Plan. Okay, so the Secretary of State, George Marshall, proposed an aid package to help Europe rebuild after World War II. This is a guy from the United States. I want you to write right next to this bullet, right here, that's written out for you. I want you to write United States. Okay, this guy is from the U.S. and he gives an aid package. And what that means is he gives money to help Europe rebuild after World War II. Okay, again, we're talking Europe, the continent. Europe is not a country. So all the countries within Europe, like Germany, Great Britain, places like France, Spain, Italy, places that had been devastated after the war and needed help rebuilding. Okay, this is what you're going to write down. So you can pause me right now and write it down. The ultimate goal was to make sure some European countries did not turn to communism to help them rebuild. Okay, they're trying to prevent countries falling to communism because they were so poor and broke after World War II. Okay, so when we put that in terms of numbers, that equals 13 billion, roughly 160 billion in today's money. Okay, that's a lot of money given to countries in Europe. And so we can see the higher the stack of dollar bills, the more money that was given to those countries. So we can see France, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, West Germany, all these places that the United States was trying to prevent from falling to communism. Okay, so we have the Marshall Plan, which we just talked about. The second one is going to be the Truman Doctrine. So Greece and Turkey were seriously considering becoming communist countries following World War II. Okay, their countries were devastated by the war and they were struggling to recover. And so they were also very close to the Soviet Union, and so what the United States, especially President Harry Truman, which is who it's named for, proposed another package of money to go to just these two countries to help them rebuild. And the last thing that you need to write down, this bullet here, this was to prevent them from turning to the USSR for help and becoming communist, because we know if they took money from the Soviet Union, they were probably going to convert to communism. Okay? The way that I teach students to remember this is, and I want you to write this down next to it, Truman Doctrine, greasy Turkey. Okay? Seriously, I know it's going to seem silly, but it will help you remember what two countries it went to. So the Truman Doctrine, Greece and Turkey, greasy Turkey. Okay? And it's to help prevent the spread of communism from countries falling to communism. That's going to be huge for you to remember. Okay, President Truman giving an address about the Truman Doctrine. Alright, let's look at this political cartoon for a second, okay? We've worked with them a lot this year. I want to keep continuing to work on them, if I could speak. And so we look at this bear here, and we know he represents the Soviet Union for a couple different reasons. First of all, the Soviet Union symbol, this hammer and sickle representing communism, is represented. That's your first clue. The second one, much in the way that the United States is usually represented by Uncle Sam or the eagle, the USSR is always represented by a bear, especially during the Cold War. Okay, and so we know that the Soviet Union is on one side. On the other side, we have an eagle, and we can tell that this eagle in particular represents the United States because he has stars on his back, right? Kind of giving you a sense of the United States flag. And so when we look at this picture and we just break down what we physically see, which is what I've tried to teach you this year, okay? We have a bear, we have an eagle, we have a great big crevice in between, okay? And we have papers falling that say irresponsible statements and deepening suspicions. So we take this to mean, right, that the Soviet Union, represented by the bear, the United States represented by the eagle are kind of coming apart, right? There's this divide between the two, okay? And it's caused by these deepening suspicions or being suspicious of one another and irresponsible statements, just kind of trash talking the other, okay? And as these papers fall, that crevice is going to get wider, okay? And we're going to see why this crevice is going to continue to widen. Okay, the other thing, Winston Churchill is going to come up with this term, and I hope that you have done it in your homework also so you know a little bit, but the Iron Curtain, okay? And so we see this in this another political cartoon. We see a couple of things happening. This crouched over old man with the cigar is Winston Churchill from Great Britain, okay? And so we see across the ground is Europe and some train tracks, okay, and no admittance. And if you don't know what that means, no admittance means no entry, right? You're not allowed across. And it says by order of Joe. Think about in your head who Joe could be. From the leaders that we've talked about this year, who could Joe be? Okay. If you came up with Joseph Stalin, you would be correct, okay? And so by order of Joseph Stalin, no admittance across Europe, okay? And so this Iron Curtain is descending across Europe. You can see it's cutting off the E. And on one side is the Soviet Union, we can see from the flag. And on the other side is Western Europe, which we can tell from Winston Churchill. Okay. The main thing that we need to know today or tonight, whenever you're doing this, is the Berlin airlift. And so I need you to know this story. So if you don't get it the first time around, that's what's helpful about these videos, is you can go back and watch it and listen to me explain it if you don't get it the first time around. So the Soviet Union wanted to control the entire capital of Berlin. Obviously, it's buried within their territory, and the United States was unwilling to give up their portion. So what did the Soviets do to try and get the United States portion is they cut off supply lines going in and out of West Berlin to try and force the U.S. to give it up. So let's go back and look at this map that we have up here. So here's Berlin that we're talking about. The Soviet Union wanted to control these parts here, okay, because it's buried deep within their territory. You can kind of understand why they might want it. And so the United States, controlling all of this part now, okay, refuses to give it up. They don't want to give up this really highly valued piece of territory. And so what the Soviet Union does is, if you can imagine, there's train tracks coming in and out of this territory, okay, from all over, right, bringing in supplies. And what the Soviet Union does is they close off all these supply lines. They close off all these train tracks, all these waterways, and they don't allow supplies to come into this part of Berlin. Okay, and so what they're trying to do is force the United States to say, okay, you can have the part if you start allowing supplies to come into the western part. Okay, and I guess you can probably predict what the United States is going to say. They're going to say, heck no. And so what the United States starts doing is they start airlifting supplies in. So this is the same map that we were looking at before, just a little bit different color and a little bit different graphic. So over here is where the United States is allowed. Okay, this is their territory along with France and Great Britain. And they are taking supplies, loading them onto planes, and flying them into the western part of Berlin. Whoops, did not mean to do that, sorry. And so they airlift supplies in, and the scary thing about this is, well, before I get ahead of myself, let's look at the outcome of this. So, really famous photograph from this time, United States plane loaded with supplies. Remember, these are German people, these are not Russian people. These are German people living in West Berlin that had been cut off from supplies, and they are desperately waiting things like milk, cereal, anything to sustain their lives, right? Because they live in a very small territory, they're not farming. And in response to this blockade, okay, the U.S. airlifted supplies into West Berlin against the Soviet blockade. So they did exactly what the Soviet Union was trying to avoid, okay? So Stalin and the Soviets did not attack the planes flying in and out, but gave up, instead they gave up trying to control that part of West Berlin, okay? And so the United States was successful in this, Soviet Union was not, and the Soviet Union gave up trying to get a hold of that portion of West Berlin. Okay. The scary thing about this, okay, let me just explain this first before you get to the next one and start writing. The scary thing about this was that the United States could have been attacked by the Soviet Union at any time, right? The Soviet Union could have shot down the planes, could have started a World War III, could have done any of those things, but they didn't.